Blog Talk Radio.
Good Saturday morning out there in off-the-shelf land, and to all of you tuning in through Blog Talk Radio or Rainbow Soul, iTunes, however you're tuning in, we want to thank you for listening to Off the Shelf, especially to our loyal listeners who we've been here now for 12 years. So we want to thank all of you, to our new listeners and our loyal listeners, and thank you for joining us. We have a wonderful author in the lineup for you here at Off the Shelf this morning. But before we introduce today's guest and launch into the questions, I want to, as we started doing several weeks ago, just leave you with a thought. And the thought today is, if you wait until you're ready, you'll be waiting the rest of your life. If you wait until you're ready, you'll be waiting the rest of your life. And that said, something that I didn't wait to do, and I know our guests didn't either. And for those of you who love story, you stop and think about how much story impacts our lives. At the nonfiction level, we know with our newspaper stories, the word of mouth, our lives are filled with story, from news and then novels and poetry, stories told through pictures. I'm just truly blessed and grateful to have been given the gift to write. We all are storytellers. All of us are, not just those who gossip and make stuff up, but we all are storytellers, whether we're passing along the truth or whether we're totally making something up. There is a story that I have written, and it's titled Love Pour Over Me. And it is, if you love mystery and you value relationships, there's a complicated relationship between a father and a son, and they're from Ohio. The son goes on to go to college at a major university in Pennsylvania. He's a track and field standout. We know with the Olympics coming, he's the guy who would have gotten the gold medal in the Olympics. He's also an academic standout, but it's the things that go on with him and his father. His father raises him as a single parent, a very complicated relationship. And then he meets a woman in college who is truly his soulmate, and a motley crew of friends. If you value, again, relationships, and you like to see how we actually help to shape each other, you will really enjoy Love Pour Over Me. And it's in print and ebook format. And I would love for you to get a copy of Love Pour Over Me and let me know how you enjoy it. You can also read free excerpts from Love Pour Over Me and my other books at my website, which is chisel.com, CHISTELL.com. And I hope you do more than just think about it, but actually go over and do it and get a copy of Love Pour Over Me and let me know how you enjoy it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And now let us go and meet our very special off-the-shelf guest for this morning. And our special off-the-shelf guest is James Hanna, and he hails from Australia. He worked in criminal justice in Indiana, where he worked as a counselor. He also worked in domestic violence and stalking with the San Francisco Probation Department. He's written several short stories, which have been published in publications like Old Crow Review, the Literary Review, the California Writers Club Literary Review, and the Sandhill Review. And James Hanna is also the author of the books The Siege and Call Me Pomeroy. You can check James out online at willwriteforfood.org. We had to ask him what came up with that. And it's spelled exactly the way it sounds, WILLWRITEFORFOOD.org, willwriteforfood.org. Welcome to Off the Shelf, James.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
We are so glad to have you, and your books are so interesting. I encourage our listeners, again, it's willwriteforfood.org. Just read a few excerpts from his books at Amazon. Check out his books at his website, and tell me if you won't want to go out and purchase one today. He is a talented author, and he brings realism and a sense of humor, especially to Call Me Pomeroy. But where did you come up with that URL from? That is, we've interviewed a lot of authors, James, I got to tell you. That's the first.
I just remembered the early days when I started writing. I was 24. I started writing in a little fishing village in Tasmania, and it was about 20 years before I got something published. So I think Will Write for Food applies. But I've had a lot of success recently, so I'm not sure I'm going to be writing for food anymore.
Oh, congratulations, congratulations. And again, like I said, we are really delighted to have you on here, and I'm especially delighted if our listeners are just being introduced to your works, just reading your works. I said he is very, very talented. So that's why I'm glad to have you on. Now, before we launch into the questions, can you tell our off-the-shelf listeners, this is a standard question we ask each of our guests, just to give our listeners some type of a background on who the author is. So before we go into the questions, can you tell off-the-shelf listeners where you grew up and what life was like for you growing up?
I grew up overseas. My father was a Foreign Service officer in the State Department. And we came to live in the United States when I was about 15. When I was 21, I was pretty much bored with American life. I wanted a harder edge to life. So I caught a tramp freighter to Australia, and I roamed the continent for 7 years. I was a cowboy in the northern outback. I worked the barge runs to Timor, the crayfish boats in Tasmania. Did a lot of migrant work. And I did a lot of reading books. I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
Oh, and I did a lot of reading, mostly by firelight in the northern outback, and developed my compulsion to write. So I eventually returned to the United States, and I picked up 2 degrees in criminal justice on the GI Bill. And I joined the Indiana Department of Corrections, where I was a prison counselor for 20 years and a program coordinator. And after that, I joined the San Francisco Probation Department, where I worked as a probation officer in a domestic and stalking unit. So the criminal element figures very strongly in my writing.
What bored you about the United States? There's so many different. I was talking to two ladies recently. Like the South, the Northeast, the Midwest, the West, they're so different from each other right here in the U.S. And so many different things you can do here. I'm just curious. Do you think it's because you grew up your formative years and out of the United States? That's interesting to me. Even when I was researching for your feature interview, what was it that you found boring?
Well, I grew up in Iraq. I grew up in Iraq, Iran, Paraguay, Brazil, Germany, cultures that go back far longer than the culture in the United States. Our culture is kind of an adolescent among cultures. So with these other countries as my reference point, I was looking for more to life than I find in the United States. And I certainly found it in the northern outback of Australia. I spent a lot of time with the Aboriginals and spent a lot of time in a number of pretty interesting and challenging jobs. I'm pretty much an adventure junkie, and I had a lot of adventure in Australia. And, of course, the adventure continued with my 34-year career in criminal justice.
Yeah, I'm sure. I've always wanted to visit Australia. Can you tell us a little bit more what it was like? Maybe it's when I'm listening to you now, you're saying reading books by firelight. Did you live outdoors? Did you have a house? What was it like for you living there?
Oh,
were you in the city
living,
or no? Did you not live in the city?
I lived in Sydney for a while, Tasmania for a while, but I also spent a lot of time in the northern outback of Australia. And the cattle stations are just little footholds in vast tracts of land, tea tree scrubs, paperbark scrubs, mud flats, and most of the time I would be on horseback working cattle in the northern outback. This country is so primitive that it hasn't even achieved statehood yet. And I spent a whole lot of time at night around campfires reading.
Did you watch television and listen to the radio? And it's like it's almost like I'm going back in time from the way you lived there. Did you give up all of those, like the TV, the radio? Did you give all that up? And when I was in the northern outback. When I was in the northern outback, yes, I did. When I was working the crayfish boats, we'd be at sea for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and we didn't have TV or radio out there. And when we came back to land, it was hard to walk on land because you were used to the pitch and roll of the boat. So, yeah, I was cut off a lot. But I think there may have been an advantage in that because TV can desensitize you. I think you have far more potent sources of stimulation through great books, and I read a lot of those. Wow! Oh my gosh! I think we had a couple of guests on who traveled abroad. One writer, his mother actually had to flee a country that she was being outspoken, and it wasn't accepted, and they actually had to flee. And they went to another country, and then he ended up in the United States. Now, you worked as a counselor and with domestic violence and stalking offenders. Did that work, is that what inspired you to start writing your own novels?
The inspiration came, I think, when I was 24. That's when I started writing seriously. And it took me a long time to become competent at it. You mentioned in one of your interviews that you can't take the elevator to success, you have to take the stairs. And that's particularly true when you're writing, unless you're a celebrity with a ghostwriter. There's no fast track to success. So it took me a long time to learn the craft. But the experiences I had in the Indiana Department of Corrections and the San Francisco Probation Department have supplied tremendous grist to my writing, and have provided me with some really interesting characters that I wouldn't have met any other way.
Now, are any real-life experiences, as we move into talking about your books, are any real-life experiences, James, that you had while you were working in criminal justice, are any of these either directly or indirectly, do they find their way into your books, and again, even if ever so faintly so?
There's a lot of real life experience in the siege. When you're working in the criminal justice system, there's often a serious disconnect between you and management. And it does create a sense of frustration. It also creates a sense of entering a void from which you may never quite return. So the struggles that are experienced by the character Tom Hemmings in The Siege are struggles that I really did experience. I was caught between a rock and a hard place when the institution privatized services. And at times I didn't really know where my loyalties belonged. Did it belong with the inmates who were being shortchanged and exploited by the cut rate services, or did it belong with management that had put these contracts together? So, yes, in The Siege, I'm pretty much reliving what I experienced.
So can you tell us just, can you tell us briefly, and you have had such a rich life. There's a commercial that comes on TV, and it talks about the haves, people who just have things. They have expensive furniture. They have an expensive house, an expensive car, but they don't do much. So they say the haves and those who have the rich experiences, and you don't realize that you're wealthy because of the experiences that you have, which it takes courage to get those. You're very, very rich in the experiences that you've allowed yourself to have. But that said, can you tell us, when you talk, and I've heard so many people say the privatization of the criminal, it was really a wrong turn, because you've got judges getting kickbacks, you've got people, there's just money, and it's almost, we need to fill these institutions so we can get rich. From what your standpoint, how did you see it change the system, and even how we, from an arrest all the way through imprisonment to probation, how did you see it change it? Because the focus shifted to money.
Yes, it did. Actually, I implemented changes when I was in the Indiana Department of Correction. I was working in a medium security facility, and after I had been there about a year, I had an epiphany. I realized that probably 85% of the inmates did not need to be at that level of incarceration, but they were being kept there because it was profitable. So I took over the work release screening and referral program, and I evaluated and recommended inmates for work release, where they would be going to the halfway houses. They could hold down jobs. They could pay into victim restitutions funds. They had more of a sense of self-worth. And I had the work release program for about 8 years, and I used my writing skills to write reports recommending many inmates for work release. And one of my proudest achievements is that in the 8 years I had the program, I was able to get about 500 inmates out of medium security facilities where they were stagnant and often exploited into the work release centers, where they were able to lead productive lives.
Wow. Good for you. Good for you. And thank you for that, to do that work. Now, can you give us, before I have one more question I wanted to ask you before we start talking about the siege more. I had to ask you this. Which is tougher, James, because you have a lot of short story writing experience. Is that how you got started as a writer, or did you start writing novels? And which is tougher, short stories or novels?
I started with short stories in Australia. And then I started writing The Siege. It was a 10-year effort. And to give myself a break, I wrote short stories. Because if you're stuck on the same thing all the time, you can start spinning your wheels. So I wrote them contemporaneously. Which is tougher? That's hard to say. With a short story, it's like building a Swiss watch. Every word has to count. Everything has to be exactly in. With a novel, you can be sloppier, but not too sloppy. Then my first success came with short stories. After about 25 years of writing and honing the craft and learning the pitfalls that a writer can fall into, I got my first acceptance. It was a story about a manhunt in the dead of winter. And it was accepted by a journal now defunct called Crow Review. And then I placed another one in a journal called Hidden City Review. And then all of a sudden I was placing them left and right. And after 25 years of not getting published, I couldn't believe it. And then I combined all my short stories into a third book, and it's entitled A Second Less Capable Head and Other Rogue Stories, and it just came out recently through my publisher, St. Hugh Review Press.
Oh my goodness! You just kept at it for our off-the-shelf listeners who are tuning in and who are thinking, "Wow, how do you get there? How do you get there?" So that's why I ask these questions, so our listeners can hear how our guests got from where they started to where they are now. Now, James, if you could just treat us to a brief synopsis of The Siege.
Okay. The Siege takes place at a medium security prison in Indiana. Inmates fed up with the problems caused by privatization take 12 guards hostage and hold them in a laundry dorm. Tom Hemmings, the point of view character and a dorm counselor, is conscripted to defuse the riot, because even though he's perceived as something of a maverick by the prison administration, the inmates like him. So he's given the job of diffusing the situation. And in this effort, he's befriended by two inmate leaders, Hamal Hassan, a member of the Nation of Islam, and Chester Mahoney, a pedophile who is also a member of the American Gospel Party. And this is a backroads organization with a strong anti-government philosophy. Aligned with these characters, he goes in to defuse the situation, while sharpshooters are perched like crows on the top of the administration building, and the emergency squads are awaiting the order to attack. And the pivotal moment comes when he enters the dormitory with Chester Mahoney as his spokesman in an attempt to diffuse the situation. And I won't say anything more because that might prove a spoiler. But,
oh, wow. And to our listeners, again, it is James' style of writing. And he said it took him 10 years to write the novel, which to me shows a healthy respect for the reader. Now, can you describe Tom Hemmings to us? Can you give us some background on him, where he's from, a little bit about his family background, how he got into his job, what type of relations does he have with the inmates? What kind of a man is Tom?
Tom Hemmings is a conflicted man. He doesn't believe in the system that he's part of.
Wow.
But he's still a champion of the system because he feels that the devils he is protecting are a little more artful than the ones waiting to take their place. I use a famous quote by Nietzsche: "Look into the void, and the void will look into you." And I had this experience myself in criminal justice. When you go into the void, you are being evaluated by the void. You are profiling inmates, but inmates are also profiling you. So if you look into the void will look into you. And if you have a weakness, the void will find it and will use it for its purposes. So Tom Hemmings is a conflicted man who finds himself lost in the void, and he never quite finds his way out of it. But he does form friendships with highly flawed people. He forms friendships with Henry Yoakum, a sociopathic guard, with Sarah Baumgardner, a loose woman who's working as a correctional officer, Chester Mahoney. And these relations, I use foxfire as a metaphor to define the relationships. You only find foxfire in rotten wood, but you can read by foxfire. So
Okay. Now, what causes, again, and you may have said this earlier, but what causes this standoff at the Indiana penal farm?
Yeah. I wrote The Siege to dramatize the plight of anybody working in the prison industry. Mismanagement, danger, and contracts with cutthroat privateers are a big part of the problem. Another problem is that the employee unions are generally too ineffectual to represent the line staff. Either they're in bed with management or so busy vilifying one another that they've lost sight of their true mission. I also wrote it as a metaphor for America today. Like the bureaucrats in The Siege, our politicians seem to have prioritized mercantilism over humanity. Thomas Jefferson is quoted as saying, "The end of the democracy and the defeat of the American Revolution will occur when government falls into the hands of lending institutions and moneyed corporations. In America today, I think we may be close to the defeat of the American Revolution. So all these motifs, I think, are present in the siege.
Wow. Now, why was Tom? He was so calm. He was so calm about the riot when it first started. He was so calm, and what changed his perception? I don't want you to get a story away, but he was so calm. It was almost like you would expect him to be frantic when it started, but he wasn't. He was just the total opposite of what you would expect. And then what caused him to, what changed his perception? But I don't want you to get a story away at the same time.
I think Tom was frustrated and scared all the time, but he's kind of a disaffected character. One of my readers described Tom as the most disaffected character that she ever read about. So he's kind of a bubble, kind of an insulation around himself. When I was particularly in the San Francisco probation department, I kind of lived in a bubble because I was in a position where any time the behavior of other people could impact me severely. And I could give you a couple of examples. So you almost have to do a self-hypnosis on yourself and say, well, everything's okay until it proves otherwise. Whatever happens, happens. Because it's kind of the only way you can get through it. Because you're in a tense, traumatic situations all the time.
As a probation officer? You wouldn't think that.
Well, I was in a specialized unit, a domestic violence and stalking unit.
Oh, yes.
So there was always
Go ahead.
There was always the potential that a client would kill his domestic partner. And I did have that experience once. A woman was frantic. She said her husband was about to kill her. So I called him in, and I took him into custody. And this happens all the time. By the time the case went to court, they had reconciled. So the woman stood in front of the judge. She jumped up and down and said, Your Honor, I lied. Please put me in jail instead because I lied. So the judge let the guy out because the judge was unable to determine a preponderance of evidence. And he got out, he went home. And then a few days later, I was taking the Caltrain to my job, and I read an article about a body that turned up in a trunk in San Francisco Bay. And then I read a little further, and I recognized the name of the victim. And she had empowered him, and he had killed her. And incidentally, that story, I wrote it up and I put it in my new book, A Second Less Capable Head and Other Rogue Stories. It's the final story. It's entitled The Body in the Bay. It was recently published online in Red Savina Review, a journal that likes the really gritty stuff. And then there are a few other incidents. Also, with stalking, stalkers can start stalking you if you hold them accountable for their behavior. And I was stalked myself a few times. Yeah.
Wow.
I was stalked myself a few times. And one stalker researched myself and my wife on the internet, and then started making the same death threats to my wife that he was making to Nicole Kidman. He was a celebrity stalker. So that was a really unnerving experience.
Oh my gosh! You know, before we go on and talk. Before we talk about Pomeroy, I had to ask. You know, listening to you. My sister she's a school teacher now, but she worked as a cop, and we people who work at psychotherapists, communal work. My oldest brother's a pastor. You counsel people. You seem to. It's almost like we have this hope that something's going to happen and it's all going to end and get better. And then you look at history and you say it almost is like humanity keeps going in this circle where we come out of doing something, whether it's slavery, the Holocaust, and you think, okay, we're getting better. And then it's like, no, we're not getting better. We're going in a circle. Do you ever get that feeling? And if so, what do you think it would take, based on your work, to bring us out of this circle? We seem to be going in a big circle. It just you say we've gotten that down. We're not doing that anymore. We've gotten better, and then boom, here comes something else, and we're still in the same cycle. It's like, does it really ever end?
I think as a writer, you want to state the problem, but you don't necessarily want to offer solutions because then you turn your art into rhetoric. So with The Siege, I don't offer solutions, but I want the reader to feel the experience. I want him to see the dead bodies. I want him to smell the tear gas. I want him to feel the frustrations. And if the writer effectively states the problem, I think he's done his job. Remember Tolstoy's novels, Anna Karenina, War and Peace. The novels were weakest where Tolstoy prescribes solutions and tries to explain the meaning of life. I think our art should be purer than offering solutions.
Okay. Now, how soon after you finished writing The Siege, James, did you sit down and start working on Call Me Pomeroy? And am I saying the name correctly?
Yes. I was writing Pomeroy at the same time as I was writing The Siege.
Oh.
And
okay.
Pomeroy was inspired by a lot of the clients I had in the San Francisco Hall of Justice. Clients with narcissistic personality disorders, clients with explosive disorders, antisocial personalities. And Pomeroy is a composite of these traits. And it was also inspired by the locker room humor that I shared with my field partner. Humor is very important when you're in a situation like that because it helps diffuse a lot of situations. And it's good to have a partner that keeps you laughing. So I was working on Pomeroy at the same time because Pomeroy just came banging on my door like a riled-up stranger demanding to be let in. It's one of those rare moments when a character just explodes into your life and takes over. And with Pomeroy, I felt as if I was the medium and Pomeroy was the author. He was telling me what to do.
Interesting. Now, can you introduce us to Pomeroy? What's Pomeroy like?
Okay, Pomeroy is a street musician, and he's on parole, and he's a rapper, and he has a marathon ditty called "Anson My Pants," which has about 200 verses, and he keeps writing it. So Pomeroy decides that he wants to get famous, so he heads to occupy Oakland, and then he heads to the spin-off movements in London and Paris. And he doesn't have a political agenda. His agenda is to get on television, attract an agent, and get $1 million recording contract for his ditty called "Anson My Pants." And he accidentally becomes a hero of the counterculture. He becomes a hero of the black bloc anarchists, those guys who dress in black and wear Guy Fawkes masks, and they're internet hackers. Then in Paris, he becomes affiliated with female Ukrainian girls against Putin's government. And he becomes essentially a hero of the counterculture. This in spite of the fact that he's completely foul-mouthed, narcissistic, misogynistic. But he also has a gentle side. He likes art for art's sake. When he visits the Louvre during one of his misadventures in Paris, he's appalled that all these people are running past all these great paintings just because they want to see the Mona Lisa. But Pomeroy sees the beauty all around him. He's kind to people. He protects women. He even rescues his parole officer, a Hispanic woman, when she's being threatened by a mob of angry Tea Partiers. So Pomeroy is somebody who's trapped in his personality, but beneath all the buffoonery and the offensive language is something very gentle that wants to get out. And I think it's the dichotomy of the character that attracts readers to him. Some readers can't get beyond the foul language, but those who do, I think they find a very interesting and nuanced character in Pomeroy.
Oh, okay. Was this Pomeroy's first attempt to make it big? Did he try to make it before he headed for Occupy Oakland, or was this? Okay, so how long had he been playing music before he headed to this Occupy Oakland? And had he ever tried to make it big before? I know you said he's rap, he keeps adding on to this song, but was this, what made him, if he hadn't tried to make it big before, what was it about this that made him go, this is my great opportunity?
Magical thinking. He really does believe that if he goes to Occupy Oakland and gets himself on television, an agent is going to come running to him. He's also a narcissist. So he's constantly trying to make it big throughout all 6 of the Pomeroy episodes. And in the final episode, his madness is validated. I won't spoil it by telling you exactly what happens, but his madness is validated in the final story.
Okay, so Pomeroy. Go ahead.
Pomeroy came about because I was able to hook up with exactly the right journal. I had sent it to a number of university presses, and the editors praised it. One of the editors wanted me to tone down the character, another wanted me to shorten the story. But then it went to a journal called Empty Sink Publishing, and they really liked the gritty stuff, and the editors are really great. And the editor at Empty Sink Publishing saw the story for what it was, and he loved it. And he made it the editor's choice in the inaugural issue of Empty Sink. But then the editor started asking for more stories, so I wrote more stories that were serialized. And ultimately I wrote 6 stories, which turned into a book, which is doing pretty well right now. So it shows you what can happen when preparation meets opportunity. It was just magical what happened when I hooked up with this particular journal.
But you also have to, I think it's very important to also say this. When you said Pomeroy, he had magical thinking. It's easy to get tripped up into that. You also have to take action. And there's so many self-help and motivational books and things out here that people think if they just get pumped up enough, you actually have to take steps. If you're trying to get a job, you need a good cover letter and a resume. And if you're not getting the responses, then you have to go back and tweak and edit and change those until you get what you want. You might have to practice your interviews. Weight's not just going to fall off of you. There's certain things you have to do. So, yes, it's good that you got that, but you spent all those years writing. You've got material for your books from the way you've lived your life and your different experiences. This stuff doesn't just happen overnight. And a lot of people, I talk to people, you see so many people just they waiting for something to come to them. You got to go get this stuff, man. You got to take actions and go get these things. That's said about Pomeroy. Pomeroy could be so many artists. Aside from some maybe particular things about him, he could be so many artists. I've talked to people who've poured thousands into something that, even if you watch like this show that comes on called American Greed, you look at these stories and you're like, what are you thinking? And they just, this magical thinking. They think if I do this, boom, all this is going to happen. And so Pomeroy seems to have some of that going for him. That said, when you said he's into magical thinking and the narcissism, does he ever hold down a real job?
No, he doesn't.
Wow. How old? I'm sorry, James. You got me going now. How old is Pomeroy? And he never holds a real job?
No, and he doesn't want much by way of handouts either. In the first episode of the Pomeroy stories, he says he doesn't want a handout from the government because he wants to stay lean and hungry in order to develop and promote his music. And although he's been in jail about 50 times, he's a pro-social individual. He's oriented towards a conventional goal. He's not criminally oriented at all. There's different types of probationers, and Pomeroy falls under the kind of probationer who is pro-social but has so many problems and issues that it's very hard for him to keep out of jail.
How old is he?
Oh, he's 57 in the first story, and
oh my gosh!
In the final story.
Wow, you really put this character together. Oh my goodness! Now, feedback on Call Me Pomeroy, when I was doing the research for the interview for our listeners, they say that the book is hilarious. Now, did you intend on this to be a comedy of sorts?
Yes, because when you make a book hilarious, you soften up the reader, and when the reader gets to the profound passages, they're more likely to sink into him. And a lot of readers, they just laugh their heads off when they read Pomeroy, and then they kind of feel, wait a minute, I shouldn't be laughing at this, but I'm laughing anyway. And they keep on reading. So yeah, I think the humor may be the greatest hook in the book.
Now, can you tell us, for our listeners and we have listeners here who, again, I tell our guests, they would love to be in your shoes. There are people who would love to be published. If they just got one short story published, they would think, wow. What process, James? I know you said it was a process for you, but when it comes to developing your characters, and your writing is very, very good, what process do you follow to actually develop your characters?
Characters need to be multidimensional, and characters need to have contradictions. Every character in The Siege has a contradiction. Sarah Bumgardner, she's a loose woman, but she's also vulnerable. Henry Yoakum, he's a thug with a uniform, but he's very protective of Tom Hemmings. And Pomeroy, he's like a lot of gang members who are trapped in their persona. He's utterly foul-mouthed. Some readers can't get beyond his misogyny and his language. But he's also a very kind and gentle character, and he hides these traits even from himself. So I think the key to characterization is dichotomy. Create a character with a contradiction, and you're going to have a character that readers are going to relate to. Fail to do that, and you've got an archetype, a stereotype that readers aren't going to remember. So pursue the contradiction in the character.
Okay. So that is one thing that you do when you develop your characters. You look at that, because some people will start with an outline. Some people will do character sketches. Some people take bits and pieces of people that they actually know and mold them together to help shape this one character in a story. Can you?
All my characters
all your characters
all my characters are composites. Are composites. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, so all your characters are made up of people you've actually met.
Yes. Yeah. And there's probably about half a dozen people that go to make up every character. You take the most interesting parts of the people you know. Yes,
I've heard other writers who do that as well. And we probably all do it subconsciously. Now, that said, James, how can you tell that a story works? You worked on The Siege for 10 years. When do you come to a place when you say, I'm finished, the story is ready, it works? Are there any specific signs that you look for before you consider a story completely finished?
Usually when you think a story or a book is finished, it isn't. I thought The Siege was finished, and then I sent it to my publisher, and I found out it wasn't finished. There was still a whole lot of work to be done on it. So we made 5 subsequent drafts of The Siege, and then we had a very thorough proofreading also. I think it's important for writers to realize that you can't do it alone. You need input from people whose opinions that you trust. So I would urge writers, first of all, they need to set up a schedule. Second of all, they're going to have to decide what they're going to give up in order to write, because it's time-consuming. And then I would urge them to join a literary group. And this is kind of like a marriage. You have to find the right people, because the wrong people could be toxic to your creative efforts. And then be prepared to revise. Every story I've written, I've probably gone over it 200 or 300 times. And then after you go over it, solicit feedback. You won't be able to use all of the feedback, but solicit feedback and then take that feedback that resonates with you. Because unbeknownst to yourself, once you've completed a work of fiction, you have blind spots that you're not aware of. You're going to need content editors, and then once the book is done, you're going to need proofreaders, because your book is probably filled with typos that you've reviewed the book so many times that you don't see them anymore. So you're going to need somebody with an independent mind to proof it for typos. So it's a huge process.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you're done, you face the challenge of marketing, and that's a whole new mountain to climb.
Yes, you want to get a good book out there, a great story, and put tons of work into it. And I think it shows the reader that you respect the reader. When they can tell, even if they may not like the story, they can see you put a lot of effort into it, that you respect your craft and you respect the reader. When you put out a story that you just threw together, it's almost like you didn't really respect the reader or the craft. Now, your writing style is very open, engaging, and candid. Does that come natural, or do you really have to work at that?
You got to write the stuff you're afraid to write, because unless you're completely honest with the reader, you're probably not going to succeed. An editor his name is John Gist. He's with Red Savina Review. He said he only likes the work that's written in blood. And if you're going to really engage the reader, if you're going to make your stories unforgettable, you have to write in blood. And I've formed a good relationship with John Gist. He's written the introduction to my new book, A Second Less Capable Head. He's published several of my stories, and he really drove it home to me. Write your stories in blood, or your stories are not going to be real, and your stories are not going to be memorable.
Now, what have readers been saying about Call Me Pomeroy? What have you been hearing from readers about the story?
A few readers can't get past the language, and they say, I really, really hated this. Most readers, though, they're cool. They understand that I need the language to create the dichotomy of the character. And they really relate. My publisher describes Pomeroy as Don Quixote on Viagra. Con Ha, a Vietnamese writer that I have a good relationship with, says Pomeroy flows like lava, and I really appreciated that compliment.
Oh, yes.
Another writer describes Call Me Pomeroy as a fart in the scuba tank of institutional decorum.
Oh, goodness.
Empty Sink says he is the anti-hero whose time has come. Pomeroy, to me, he was inspired by the second, by William Butler Yeats. The poem starts out, things cannot hold, the center falls apart, mere anarchy is loosed upon the land. The blood-drenched tide is loose, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with a passionate intensity. And it finishes up, and what rough beast, its hour come around at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. In writing Pomeroy, I have tried to create an embodiment of Yeats's rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem to be born. And I think on a lot of levels, Pomeroy is like a child about to be born.
Wow. Yeah, at 57. Now, how did working as an editor, we haven't told our listeners, we've got about 7 minutes left in today's show, but how did working as an editor how did that influence and shape your writing? Because you had to look through the lens of an editor at other people's work and then come back to the other side and be a writer. How did your work as an editor help shape your writing?
Well, it helps you learn the craft because when you spot the inconsistencies in other people's writing, you're able to spot them in your own better. It's a very good exercise. If any of your listeners have the opportunity to work with a journal, I would certainly recommend it. But I've been able to identify the many, many traps that a writer can fall into that prevents his work from reaching its fullest potential. Common traps, excessive use of adjectives, too many ornamental adverbs. A lot of adverbs are simply redundant, such as he shouted loudly. You don't need the loudly. They tell instead of showing, and a lot of them try to explain their endings. They can write a very good story, and then at the end, they add a superfluous paragraph trying to explain their stories. And this, to me, shows a lack of confidence. You need to finish up your stories with a nice tight image. You don't need to put a bow around them.
Okay. What did it feel like to be nominated for 2 Pushcart Awards? And congratulations. What was that experience like for you?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's validation, and I've been waiting for validation for a long time. And when you get a Pushcart nomination, you're walking about 5 feet off the ground for maybe 2 weeks. It's fantastic. But
and again,
the prizes are only important for promotional reasons. The joy of the writing is in the process, and the joy of writing is when you hear from readers who've been touched by your work and who want to share it with other people.
Now, how did writing The Siege and Call Me Pomeroy and your latest book, if you can give us a title again, how did writing these 3 books, how did it change you as a writer and as a person?
It gave me a sense of validation. There was a time when I wondered, why have I been given this talent if the world does not rise up and take notice? So what it's created in me is a sense of relief. Finally, I have consummated my art. Finally, I'm being recognized. Finally, all that hard work and sweat and learning and relearning and perfecting my craft have produced results. So I'm changed as in that I feel a sense of validation and also a rather profound sense of relief.
Good for you. Good for you. And hopefully other of our listeners can have that experience at some point in their writing careers as well. Now, where can our off-the-shelf listeners get a copy of your books?
Okay. You can get copies of the books on Amazon. Just go on Amazon, type in the name of the book, and it'll pop right up. Type in my last name, Hanna, if you need to. And you can order them on Kindle for a nominal price. And there are also paperback copies available of Siege and Call Me Pomeroy. And in a few weeks, there'll also be a paperback copy available of A Second Less Capable Head.
What's the title? Can you say the title of your other book again? The second. What is the title of it? The second?
A Second Less Capable Head. And the title story is about a Tea Party activist who wakes up one morning and finds he is growing another head. It has a Kafka-like quality to it. And he wants his doctor to take it off, but the government won't let him take it off because this is innocent life, and he's not supposed to join to destroy innocent life. Then compounding the problem, Trixie, his girlfriend, forms a romantic attachment to the head, I think because it looks kind of like Robert Downey Jr. So the...
Oh, my God.
So the frustrations of the Tea Party activist, whose name is Virgil Plowright, grows as the head continues to grow. And finally the head is so big that Virgil starts to resemble the letter Y. And then it's D-Day. He's got to figure out how he's going to get this head taken off him without going to jail for murder.
Wow. Now, if you're on any social networks, can you tell us where our listeners can find you online?
Yeah. I've got a website, but that's still in development. You can find me on the Sandhill Review Press website. It's got some vignettes, also how to survive as a prison guard, stuff like that. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on my Amazon authors page, and it's got all 3 books. Goodreads also has all 3 books. Book Daily. I'm in the emerging writers there. And right now, A Second Less Capable Head is number 2, and Pomeroy is number 12 among the emerging authors. Also, there's a lot of interviews online. If you just type in James Hanna interviews, you'll find interviews with Empty Sink Publishing, with Red Savina Review, and a number of other sources.
Okay.
So
we want to thank I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'm all over the internet right now. It's pretty easy to find me.
Okay, we want to thank James Hanna. He's the author of the books The Siege, Call Me Pomeroy, and I think his most recent is it The Second Less Capable Head, if I'm getting that correctly, and you can find him at the Sandhill Review website. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Amazon's probably the best place to go. It's got book excerpts, and you can look through the excerpts and decide if you want to purchase the book.
So Amazon.com, and his writing is a treat. And then the website willwriteforfood.org, and he has another website which is in development. But again, James Hanna, go over to Amazon.com. He's the author of The Siege, Call Me Pomeroy, and A Second Less Capable Head. You really you're giving yourself a treat to enjoy his work. So we want to thank him for being here with us, and we want to thank each of you, our listeners, for being here with us here at Off the Shelf. And remember today's thought: if you wait until you're ready, you'll be waiting the rest of your life. Go out and create a fabulous day for yourself. Remember, you are awesome. You are amazing. See you back here next Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or New York City time. Please tell book lovers everywhere, tune in to Off the Shelf, 11 a.m. in the morning. We've got another great guest lined up for you next Saturday. Thank you so much, James. Bye for now. James, I'll shoot you an email.
Okay, and thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.